He flinched when she touched his boot. Not because it hurt, but because the last time someone touched him, they were pulling a gun. The apartment was dark except for the single lamp Elias kept burning in the corner. He sat in the old recliner his mother had given him before she stopped visiting, his hands trembling against the armrests. The pills were scattered across the coffee table again. He had tried to take them an hour ago, maybe 2. Time didn't move the same way anymore. There was a letter on the floor. Red stamps. Official language. Benefits denied pending further review. He had stopped reading those letters weeks ago. They all said the same thing in different words. Wait. Reapply. Provide documentation. Prove you're broken enough to deserve help but not so broken that you're beyond it. The voices were quieter tonight. Just whispers at the edge of his hearing, like static from a radio in another room. Sometimes they were louder. Sometimes they screamed. Sometimes they sounded like his old squad leader telling him to move, move, move. Sometimes they sounded like his father telling him he was worthless. Sometimes they didn't sound like anyone at all. They said he was dangerous. They said he was broken. They said no one should be left alone with him. So why was the maid on her knees, cleaning his bloodied boots, with tears in her eyes? Hello family, this is my first ever video. I'm dedicating this channel to the underprivileged and heroes of this world. I hope to build a community where people's voices can be heard, so please help like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment telling me if you know anyone who's been through this. Also tell me where you are watching from. Now, let's get into it. Elias Rowan had been a soldier once. Not just any soldier. Elite infantry. The kind they sent into places that didn't officially exist to do things that were never officially discussed. He had been good at it. Fearless, his commanders said. Dedicated. The kind of man you wanted beside you when everything went wrong. But war doesn't ask permission before it rewrites you. It doesn't send a memo. It doesn't give you time to prepare. He came back with medals he never looked at and scars no one could see. The nightmares started within a week. The checking started within a month. Doors. Windows. Shadows. Corners. He would wake up in the middle of the night convinced someone was in the apartment, and he would search every room with his heart hammering in his chest until dawn broke and he could finally breathe again. The sounds were worse. A car backfiring. A door slamming. Fireworks on the 4th of July. Each one sent him spiraling back to places he couldn't name, couldn't describe, couldn't escape. He would find himself on the floor with his hands over his head, waiting for the explosion that never came. His friends stopped calling after the 3rd time he couldn't make it to dinner because he couldn't get out of bed. His family stopped visiting after he shouted at his sister for moving too quickly near him. His fiancée, Sarah, lasted longer than most. She tried. She really did. But you can't love someone through a wall, and Elias had built his so high he couldn't see over it anymore. The war ended years ago. But inside Elias, it never stopped. He slept with the lights on. All of them. The apartment was always bright, always awake, because darkness meant vulnerability and vulnerability meant death. He talked to people who weren't there. Sometimes he argued with them. Sometimes he laughed. Sometimes he just listened to whatever they were saying and nodded along because it was easier than fighting. The doctors had words for it. Post-traumatic stress disorder. Schizophrenia. Anxiety. Depression. They handed him pills and pamphlets and appointments he couldn't keep because the bus routes triggered panic attacks and he couldn't drive anymore after he pulled over on the highway convinced someone was following him. Society thanked him for his service. Then it avoided him in grocery stores. He was labeled unstable. Not hero. Unstable. The apartment reflected the chaos inside him. Dishes piled in the sink, sometimes for days. Laundry sat in heaps because the laundromat felt too exposed, too vulnerable. The blinds stayed drawn because windows were sniper positions. The television stayed on because silence meant he could hear the voices more clearly. He had routines. Strange ones. Necessary ones. He touched the doorknob 17 times before he could walk away from it. He checked under the bed even though he knew nothing was there. He counted his steps from room to room because numbers felt solid when everything else felt like sand slipping through his fingers. His days blurred together. Wake up. Take pills. Check locks. Stare at walls. Argue with voices. Check locks. Take more pills. Try to sleep. Fail. Check locks. Watch infomercials until the sun came up. Repeat. The building he lived in was old. One of those post-war complexes that had seen better decades. Thin walls. Narrow hallways. A lobby that smelled like cleaning solution and something unidentifiable. Most of the residents were elderly or struggling. People who ended up there because everywhere else was too expensive or too unwelcoming. His neighbors knew about him. Of course they knew. News traveled fast in buildings like this. The veteran who screamed at night. The man who paced the hallways. The tenant in 4B who everyone avoided in the elevator. They whispered about him during mail pickup. They complained to management about the noise. They looked at him with that particular mixture of pity and fear that made Elias want to disappear entirely. He had tried to explain once. Tried to apologize to the woman in 4C after a particularly bad night. But the words came out wrong, disjointed, and she just backed away from him with wide eyes and locked her door. After that, he stopped trying. Sarah left on a Tuesday. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just packed a bag and stood in the doorway looking at him like he was already gone. They had been together for 3 years. Met before his last deployment. She was a nurse at the VA hospital, which should have meant she understood. And maybe she did understand, intellectually. But understanding something and living with it are different things. The first few months after he came back, she was patient. She held him when he woke up screaming. She helped him with his appointments. She researched therapists and support groups and medication options. But patience has limits. The night that broke everything, Elias had an episode while she was sleeping beside him. He woke up in the middle of a nightmare, couldn't tell where he was, couldn't recognize the room. In his mind, he was back in that desert compound, and Sarah's hand on his shoulder was an enemy combatant. He grabbed her wrist. Hard. Twisted it. She cried out, and the sound snapped him back to reality, but the damage was done. He hadn't meant to hurt her. Would never mean to hurt her. But intent doesn't erase bruises. She stayed for 2 more months after that. Sleeping in the other room. Keeping distance. Trying to convince herself it was salvageable. But it wasn't. I can't do this anymore, she said that Tuesday, standing in the doorway with her overnight bag. I'm scared, Elias. Not of you. For you. But I can't watch you disappear. He wanted to tell her he wasn't disappearing. He was already gone. This was just what came back. But he didn't say anything. He just watched her leave and felt nothing. The nothing was worse than the pain. At least pain meant you were still alive. After she left, the apartment got worse. Without her there to impose some kind of structure, the chaos took over completely. Dishes multiplied. Trash accumulated. The curtains stayed drawn for weeks at a time. His former unit didn't visit. They had their own problems. Their own nightmares. Their own pills. The ones who were doing okay didn't want to be reminded of what they could become. The ones who weren't doing okay couldn't help anyone else. There was a group chat that he was still part of. Sometimes messages would come through. Someone sharing a meme. Someone announcing a wedding or a birth. Someone asking if anyone wanted to meet up for drinks. Elias never responded. He would read the messages and feel like he was looking at them through thick glass. Their lives had moved forward. His had stopped. One of the guys from his unit, Thompson, had reached out directly a few times. Asked how he was doing. Invited him to a barbecue. Sent a text on his birthday. Elias never answered. Eventually, Thompson stopped trying. The neighbors complained about the noise. The shouting. The pacing. The way he would stand in the hallway at 3 in the morning staring at the wall. Building management sent notices. Warnings. Threats about lease violations and noise complaints. He ignored them all. What were they going to do? Evict him? That almost seemed easier than continuing. The therapy sessions were supposed to help. The VA had set him up with a counselor. A kind woman named Dr. Patterson who had soft eyes and spoke in measured tones. He went to 4 sessions before he stopped. It wasn't her fault. She was trying. But every session felt like being forced to pick at wounds that were barely scabbed over. She would ask him to talk about his experiences, to process his trauma, to identify his triggers. But talking about it didn't make it better. It made it worse. It brought everything closer to the surface. Made the voices louder. Made the nightmares more vivid. After the fourth session, he came home and had the worst episode in months. He destroyed his kitchen. Threw dishes. Punched a hole in the wall. Screamed until his throat was raw. When he finally came back to himself, he was sitting in the corner of his bedroom, shaking, with no memory of how he got there. He never went back to Dr. Patterson. The doctors treated him like a file number. 10 minutes. Next patient. Here's a prescription. Try this one. No? Try that one. Side effects? We'll adjust the dosage. Still not working? Let's try something else. He had been through 6 different medications in 8 months. Some made him too drowsy to function. Some made his hands shake worse. Some made him feel like he was watching his life through a fog. Some didn't do anything at all. The current combination made him functional enough to get through a day, but not functional enough to feel like himself. Not that he remembered what himself felt like anymore. The benefits were delayed. Therapy was cut. Insurance ran out. He was on his own with a monthly disability check that barely covered rent and groceries, let alone medication that cost more than he wanted to think about. He started skipping doses to make the pills last longer, which made everything worse, which made him need the pills more. It was a cycle that had no exit. He overheard someone in the hallway one day, a neighbor talking to another neighbor. He had just opened his door to check the hallway, one of his compulsions, and heard their voices around the corner. "He's not the man he used to be," one of them said. "A woman. Maybe Mrs. Chin from 4F. I heard he was special forces or something," the other voice replied. "Now look at him. It's sad. It's scary," Mrs. Chin corrected. "He screamed so loud last week I thought someone was being murdered." Elias stood on the other side of his door and felt something crack inside him. He died over there. This was just what came back. He closed the door, locked it, checked it 17 times, then sat in his recliner and stared at the wall until the sun went down. Amara Bell moved quietly. That was the first thing Elias noticed about her. Most people made noise. Footsteps. Breathing. The rustle of clothing. Sounds that announced their presence, demanded acknowledgement. But Amara moved like water, smooth and deliberate, like she had learned a long time ago that silence was safer than sound. She was the new cleaning woman for the building. The management company had hired her after the previous cleaner quit. Something about the hours and the pay and the general state of the building. The residents were difficult. The work was hard. Most people didn't last long. But Amara needed the job. That much was obvious from the way she showed up every day, early and prepared, with supplies she had bought herself because the company didn't provide enough. She was young, mid-20s maybe, black, soft-spoken when she spoke at all. She wore her hair pulled back in a simple bun and kept her eyes down, not out of fear but out of habit, the kind of habit people develop when they've spent too long being invisible. Elias watched her sometimes from his doorway when she was cleaning the hallway. The way she worked was methodical, thorough. She didn't rush, didn't cut corners. She cleaned like it mattered, even though it was just a dingy hallway in a building no one cared about. The first time she knocked on his door, Elias almost didn't answer. He was in the middle of an episode. The voices were loud that day, arguing about something he couldn't quite follow. One voice was insisting that the neighbors were planning something. Another voice was telling him to check the locks again. A third voice, quieter than the others, was just repeating his name over and over. He had dropped a glass in the kitchen while trying to take his medication. His hands had been shaking too badly to hold it properly, and it slipped from his fingers and shattered across the linoleum floor. He just stood there staring at the broken pieces, because the idea of bending down to clean it up felt impossible. His body felt heavy, disconnected, like it belonged to someone else. The knock came. Soft. Patient. Elias looked at the door. He didn't want to answer. Didn't want to deal with another complaint or another concerned look or another person treating him like a problem to be solved. But the knock came again. Still soft. Still patient. He shuffled to the door and opened it. Amara stood in the hallway with a cleaning cart beside her. She looked at him without staring. Her eyes were calm, brown and deep and steady. She didn't look startled by his appearance, even though he knew he looked rough. Unshaven. Unwashed. Wearing the same clothes he had worn for 3 days. "I'm here to clean," she said. Her voice was quiet but clear. "If that's okay." Elias wanted to say no. Wanted to close the door and lock it and go back to the recliner and wait for the voices to quiet down. But something about the way she stood there, not rushing, not judging, not flinching, made him step aside. "Okay," he said. She nodded and pushed her cart into the apartment. Elias retreated to his recliner and sat down, watching her. The voices were still there, still arguing, but they were quieter now. Background noise instead of overwhelming static. Amara got to work. She didn't ask questions. Didn't comment on the state of the apartment. Didn't wrinkle her nose at the smell or look disgusted by the mess. She just cleaned. Methodically. Thoroughly. Like it mattered. She started with the living room. Picked up the scattered mail and papers and stacked them neatly on the coffee table. Wiped down surfaces. Vacuumed the carpet. Moved around him like he was part of the furniture, not in a dismissive way, but in a way that gave him space. When she got to the kitchen, she paused. The broken glass was still on the floor. Elias had meant to clean it up. Had thought about cleaning it up. But thinking and doing were two different things lately. Amara glanced at him. "I can get this. You don't have to move." Elias nodded. She knelt and carefully swept up the pieces, making sure to get every shard. She wiped down the floor afterward, checking twice to make sure nothing was left behind. When she stood, she looked at his boots. They were sitting by the door. Old combat boots. Worn and scuffed and stained with something dark that might have been mud or might have been something else. Elias hadn't touched them in weeks. Couldn't touch them. Every time he looked at them, he saw things he didn't want to see. Heard things he didn't want to hear. "Do you want me to clean those?" Amara asked. Elias looked at the boots. His throat tightened. "I can't," he said. His voice was rough. And used. Amara knelt again without another word. She picked up the first boot and started cleaning it. Not quickly. Not roughly. Just gently, like it was something that deserved care. She used a damp cloth to wipe away the dirt and stains, working patiently until the leather looked almost new. Elias felt his throat tighten further. Something was building in his chest. Something that felt like grief or gratitude or both. "You don't have to do that," he managed. "I know," Amara said without looking up. She kept cleaning. When she finished both boots, she set them carefully by the door and stood. She looked at him again, and for a moment, neither of them said anything. The voices had gone completely quiet. "I'll be back next week," Amara said. Then she gathered her cart and left. Elias sat in the recliner and stared at the boots. They looked different now. Cleaner. Like they belonged to someone who had their life together. Like they belonged to the person he used to be. For the first time in months, something in him felt less heavy. The week passed slowly. Elias found himself thinking about Amara more than he expected. Not in a romantic way. Not yet. Just in a way that made him aware of how long it had been since someone had treated him like a person instead of a problem. She hadn't looked at him with pity. Hadn't looked at him with fear. Hadn't looked at him like he was broken beyond repair. She had just looked at him. Seen him. And then cleaned his apartment like it was a normal thing to do. When the next week came, Elias actually got out of bed before noon. He took a shower. Changed his clothes. Tried to make the apartment slightly less of a disaster before she arrived. It wasn't much. But it was something. When Amara knocked, he answered right away. She smiled a little when she saw him. Just a small upturn of her lips, but it was there. "Good morning," she said. "Morning," Elias replied. She came in and started cleaning. This time, Elias found himself wanting to talk. He didn't know what to say, so he just watched her work and tried to think of something normal. "You do good work," he finally said. Amara glanced at him. "Thank you. How long have you been doing this?" "Cleaning?" "A few years. This building is new though. Just started here last month." Elias nodded. "The last person quit." "I heard. Do you like it?" "The work, I mean." Amara paused, thinking about the question. "It's honest." It needs doing. People appreciate it, even if they don't always say so. I appreciate it, Elias said. She smiled again. I know. They fell into silence after that, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was just quiet. Peaceful almost. When Amara finished, she looked at him. Same time next week? Yeah, Elias said. That would be good. She left, and the apartment felt less empty than before. Everyone else looked at him like a threat. Amara looked at him like a human being. The third week she came, Elias was having a worse day than usual. The nightmares had been particularly bad the night before. He had dreamed about the compound. The one where everything went wrong. Where Peterson caught the round that tore through his chest. Where Rodriguez stepped on something he shouldn't have stepped on. Where Elias had to make a choice between two terrible options and people died because of it. He woke up drenched in sweat, screaming Peterson's name, and he couldn't get back to sleep after that. The voices came back louder than they had been in weeks, overlapping and contradicting and demanding his attention. By the time morning came, he was exhausted and wired at the same time. His medication wasn't helping. The checking had gotten worse. He had touched the doorknob 43 times before he could walk away from it. He was pacing the apartment when Amara's knock came. Back and forth across the living room, muttering to himself, having an argument with a voice that was insisting the neighbors were talking about him, planning something, organizing against him. When the knock sounded, he didn't answer. He just kept pacing. The knock came again, a little louder this time. Elias? Amara called through the door. It's Amara. I'm here to clean. He stopped. No one used his name anymore. Not like that. Not like it mattered. Not like he was a person worth addressing directly. He went to the door and opened it. Amara looked at him and didn't flinch. His hair was a mess. His shirt was inside out. His eyes were red from lack of sleep and rimmed with the kind of exhaustion that went bone deep. Can I come in? She asked. He stepped aside. She came in and set down her cart, but instead of starting to clean right away, she just stood there, looking at him. Not with judgment. Not with pity. Just with something that looked like concern. Are you okay? She asked. The question should have been absurd. He was obviously not okay. Anyone could see that. But the way she asked it, calm and genuine, made him want to answer honestly. No, he said. Amara nodded. Like that was a reasonable answer. Like it didn't make him weak or broken or wrong. Do you want me to clean today, or do you want me to just sit for a while? She asked. Elias stared at her. No one had ever asked him that before. Everyone wanted him to be better. To get better. To act better. To take his medication and go to therapy and stop being so difficult. No one ever asked what he wanted. What he needed. Sit, he said. So she did. She sat on the couch, and he sat in the recliner, and they didn't talk. They just sat. The voices kept whispering, kept insisting, kept demanding, but they were background noise now. White noise. Manageable. Elias focused on his breathing. In and out. In and out. He counted his breaths. 1, 2, 3, 4. Numbers were solid. Numbers made sense. Amara didn't try to fill the silence. Didn't ask him what was wrong or tell him it would be okay. She just sat there, present and calm, like she had nowhere else to be and nothing else to do. After a while, maybe 20 minutes or maybe an hour, Elias felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. The voices got quieter. The panic that had been clawing at his chest loosened its grip. Thank you, he said quietly. Amara looked at him. For what? For sitting. You're welcome. After another few minutes, Amara stood and started cleaning. She worked quietly, efficiently, and when she was done, she looked at him again. I'll see you next week, she said. Elias nodded. She left, and the apartment felt less empty, less suffocating. Like maybe it was a place where a person could breathe. The neighbors noticed, of course. They noticed everything. Mrs. Chen saw Amara leaving Elias's apartment one day and mentioned it to Mrs. Rodriguez in the lobby. Mrs. Rodriguez told Mr. Patterson in 3A. Mr. Patterson told his daughter, who visited on weekends. His daughter told the building manager. Soon everyone was talking about it. Why does the cleaning lady spend so much time in his apartment? What's she doing in there? It can't take that long to clean a one-bedroom. Maybe he's paying her extra for something. The implications were ugly. The assumptions were worse. Elias didn't care. He had stopped caring what people thought a long time ago. Their opinions didn't matter. Their gossip didn't change anything. But Amara noticed. She always noticed. People are talking, she said one day while she was wiping down the kitchen counter. Elias was sitting at the table, watching her work. He had started doing that. Watching her. Not in a strange way or a creepy way. Just in a way that made him feel grounded. Real. Like having another person in the space confirmed that he actually existed. Let them talk, he said. She paused and looked at him. You don't care? I stopped caring a long time ago. She studied his face for a moment, then went back to cleaning. That must be lonely. It was. But he didn't say that out loud. What about you? He asked instead. Do you care? What they say? Amara shrugged. People always talk. Doesn't matter what you do. If you do your job well, they say you're trying too hard. If you keep to yourself, they say you're unfriendly. If you're kind to someone, they question your motives. So you just ignore it? I do what I know is right, she said simply. Everything else is noise. Elias thought about that. It sounded simple. It probably wasn't. Have they said anything to you directly? He asked. Mrs. Chen asked me last week how long it takes to clean your apartment. What did you tell her? That it takes as long as it takes. Elias smiled a little. It was the first time he had smiled in weeks. I bet she loved that. Amara smiled too. She looked like she wanted to ask more questions. But I just walked away. They fell into comfortable silence after that. The kind of silence that felt like understanding rather than emptiness. When Amara finished cleaning that day, she paused at the door. Elias? Yeah, don't let what they say get to you. The neighbors. They don't know you. They don't know what you've been through. Thanks, he said. She nodded and left. Elias sat at the table for a long time after she was gone, thinking about what she had said. She was right. The neighbors didn't know him. Didn't know what he had seen or done or survived. But Amara did. Or at least, she was starting to. And that mattered more than he expected. The weeks turned into months. Amara came every week. Sometimes she cleaned. Sometimes she just sat. Sometimes they talked about small things. The weather. The news. Things that happened in the building. Elias found himself looking forward to her visits. They became the structure around which his week organized itself. A reason to get out of bed. A reason to try. He started cleaning the apartment a little before she arrived. Not much. But he would pick up the worst of the mess. Put dishes in the sink. Throw away obvious trash. He told himself it was because he didn't want to make her job harder, but part of him knew it was because he wanted her to see that he was trying. She noticed. Place looks good, she said one day when she arrived. I picked up a little, Elias said, trying to sound casual. I appreciate it. That small acknowledgement made him feel proud in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. They started talking more. Real conversations. About their lives. Their pasts. The things that shaped them. Amara told him about growing up in a small town in Georgia. About her mother who cleaned houses to support 3 kids. About her brother who had been smart and funny and troubled. He heard things, she said one day. They were sitting on the couch, drinking cheap tea from the corner store. Voices. People who weren't there. Our mom didn't understand it. Thought it was drugs or rebellion or something he could just snap out of if he tried hard enough. Elias listened. He got worse as he got older, Amara continued. Couldn't hold a job. Couldn't keep friends. People were scared of him. Said he was dangerous. Unstable. Her voice was steady, but Elias could hear the weight underneath it. What happened to him? Elias asked gently. He died, Amara said quietly. 5 years ago. Took his own life. Left a note saying he was tired of being a burden. Elias felt something twist in his chest. I'm sorry, he said. Amara nodded. Me too. They sat in silence for a while. That's why you stay, Elias said. It wasn't a question. That's why I stay, Amara confirmed. Because no one stayed with him. Everyone left. Everyone gave up. And he died thinking he was too much. Too broken. Too difficult. She looked at Elias. You're not too much, she said. You're not too broken. You're just a person who's been through something terrible. That doesn't make you less. Elias didn't know what to say. His throat felt tight. His eyes felt hot. Thank you, he whispered. Amara reached over and touched his hand. Just lightly. Just for a moment. You're welcome. The episode happened on a Thursday. Elias woke up to screaming. Not from the voices. From himself. He was on the floor of his bedroom, tangled in sheets, his heart racing so fast he thought it might explode. The nightmare had been vivid. Too vivid. Blood and sand and gunfire and faces he couldn't save. Peterson's eyes as the light left them. Rodriguez's scream cut short. The weight of decisions that had no right answers. He scrambled to his feet and started checking. The windows. The doors. The closets. Over and over. Faster and faster. He couldn't stop. The compulsion was overwhelming, drowning out everything else. The voices were shouting now. Multiple voices. Overlapping. Contradicting. One screaming that someone was in the apartment. Another insisting he needed to get out. A third telling him he deserved to suffer. He was muttering. Shouting back. Arguing with people who weren't there. I checked already. I checked. Leave me alone. I checked. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely turn the doorknob. He counted. 1, 2, 3. Lost count. Started over. 1, 2, 3. The neighbors heard. Someone banged on the wall. Keep it down in there. But Elias couldn't stop. Couldn't control it. The panic had taken over completely. Someone called security. Security called the police. When the knock came at the door, loud and authoritative, Elias froze. His whole body locked up. He couldn't breathe. Couldn't move. Couldn't think. The knock came again. Louder this time. Sir, this is building security. We need you to open the door. Elias backed away from the door. His vision was tunneling. Black edges creeping in. The voices were screaming now. Warning him. Threatening him. Demanding he run or fight or hide. Then another voice. Softer. Familiar. Elias? Amara. She was in the hallway. She must have been cleaning another floor. Must have heard the commotion. Elias, it's Amara. Can you open the door? Her voice cut through everything. The noise. The panic. The chaos. He stumbled to the door, his hands still shaking, and managed to unlock it. Security was there. 2 men in uniforms. They looked tense. Ready for a problem. Their hands were on their belts, near their radios, near their weapons. Amara stepped between them and Elias. He's okay, she said. Her voice was calm. Firm. Steady as a rock. He's having an episode. He's not dangerous. Ma'am, we received multiple complaints, one of the guards said. He was older, gray at the temples, with tired eyes. Noise disturbance. Possible domestic situation. There's no domestic situation, Amara said. I know him. He lives alone. He's a veteran. He has PTSD. He's not going to hurt anyone. He just needs space. The guards hesitated. They looked at Elias. He was still shaking. Still pale. His eyes were unfocused. He looked like someone who was barely holding on. Amara looked at Elias. Are you okay? He couldn't speak. His throat had closed up. But he managed to nod. She turned back to the guards. I'll stay with him. I'll make sure everything's fine. You can go. We need to file a report, the younger guard said. File your report, Amara said. But he doesn't need police. He needs support. The guards exchanged glances. They didn't want to leave. Protocol probably said they shouldn't leave. But something about the way Amara stood there, so certain, so unafraid, so completely in control of the situation, made them back down. We'll be checking back in 30 minutes, the older guard said. If there's any more disturbance, we'll have to call the police. That's fine, Amara said. Thank you. They left, though they looked reluctant about it. Amara stepped into the apartment and closed the door gently behind her. Elias was shaking. His whole body was trembling like he was standing in a snowstorm. "Sit down," Amara said gently. He sat. He dropped into the recliner and put his head in his hands. Amara knelt in front of him, not touching, just close enough that he could see her. Close enough that her presence felt real. "You're okay," she said. Her voice was steady, grounding. "You're safe. You're here. You're in your apartment. It's Thursday morning. I'm Amara. You're Elias. You're safe." Her words were simple, concrete. Facts he could hold on to when everything else felt like it was slipping away. Elias focused on her voice, on her face, on the brown of her eyes and the calm in her expression. Slowly, very slowly, the shaking stopped. The voices quieted. The panic receded. "Why aren't you afraid of me?" he whispered. Amara tilted her head slightly. "Why would I be? Everyone else is. I'm not everyone else." Elias looked at her. Really looked at her. At this woman who had walked into his chaos and didn't run. Who stood between him and people who saw him as a threat. Who knelt in front of him now like he was worth the effort. "Thank you," he said. "You don't have to thank me," Amara said. "I'm just doing what anyone should do." "But they don't." "I know," she said softly. "I know." They sat in silence for a long time. Amara didn't move. Didn't rush him. Just stayed there, steady and present, until Elias felt like he could breathe again. Eventually, she stood. "Do you want me to make you some tea?" "Yeah," Elias said. "That would be good." She went to the kitchen and made tea. When she came back, she handed him a cup and sat on the couch. They drank in silence. When the security guards came back 30 minutes later and knocked on the door, Amara answered it. "Everything's fine," she told them. "He's calm. No more noise." The guards looked past her at Elias, who was sitting quietly in the recliner with his tea. "All right," the older guard said. "But if there's another incident, we'll have to involve the police." "Building policy." "I understand," Amara said. They left. Amara closed the door and came back to the couch. "You should probably try to sleep," she said. "You look exhausted." "I can't," Elias said. "The nightmares." "What if I stay for a while?" Amara offered. "Just until you fall asleep. Sometimes it's easier when someone else is there." Elias looked at her. "You don't have to do that." "I know," she said. "But I want to." So Elias went to his bedroom and lay down. And Amara sat in the living room, close enough that he could hear her moving around, and for the first time in months, he fell asleep without being terrified of what he might dream. This is the story of a man the world forgot and a woman who refused to walk away. But we're only halfway through. Because what comes next is not what anyone expects. Not the neighbors. Not the system. Not even Elias himself. Sometimes the hardest battles are fought in silence. Sometimes the deepest wounds are the ones no one can see. And sometimes healing doesn't look like triumph. It looks like someone staying when everyone else has left. What happens when the person who stays has to leave? What happens when the system finally notices? What happens when the man who survived war has to fight the hardest battle of his life just to keep existing? That's what comes next. Part 2 begins now. She started coming more often after that. Not just once a week anymore. Sometimes twice. Sometimes 3 times. She would come by on her days off, not to clean but just to check on him. To sit with him. To make sure he was still there. Elias protested at first. Told her she didn't need to do that. That she had her own life and shouldn't waste it babysitting a broken veteran. But Amara was stubborn in the quietest way. "I'm not babysitting you," she said. "I'm visiting a friend." Friend. The word sat strange in Elias's chest. He didn't have friends anymore. He had people who used to know him. People who had given up on him. People who crossed the street when they saw him coming. But Amara called him a friend. And somehow that mattered more than anything else. They fell into a rhythm. A routine. She would come by after her shifts or on her lunch breaks. Sometimes she brought food because she noticed he wasn't eating enough. Sometimes she brought books from the library because she thought he might like reading. Sometimes she just brought herself. They would sit and talk about everything and nothing. About her day. About his day. About the news and the weather and the strange people they encountered in the building. Slowly, carefully, Elias started to notice things about her that he hadn't noticed before. The way she smiled when she was genuinely amused, not just being polite. The way she thought before she spoke, choosing her words with care. The way she moved through the world with a quiet strength that came from surviving things she didn't talk about. He found himself wanting to know more. About her life. Her thoughts. Her dreams. "Why are you doing this?" he asked one day. They were sitting on the couch, drinking tea, watching the sun set through the blinds he had finally started opening again. "Doing what?" Amara asked. "This. Coming here. Spending time with me. You could be doing anything else." Amara was quiet for a moment. "Do you remember what I told you about my brother?" "Yeah. Before he died, in those last few months, he was so alone," she said. "He would call me sometimes. Late at night. Just to talk. Just to hear another voice. And I was busy. I was working 2 jobs. I was tired. I had my own problems." She paused. "I didn't always answer," she continued. "I told myself I would call him back. I told myself it could wait. And then one day it couldn't wait anymore because he was gone." Her voice didn't break, but Elias could hear the weight of it. "I can't fix that," Amara said. "I can't go back and answer those calls. But I can be here now. For you. That's not charity. That's not pity. That's just me choosing not to make the same mistake twice." Elias looked at her. Really looked at her. This woman who carried her own grief and still showed up. Who had every reason to walk away and chose to stay. "I'm glad you're here," he said quietly. "Me too," Amara said. The romance wasn't loud or dramatic. It didn't announce itself with grand gestures or passionate declarations. It built slowly, carefully, in the spaces between words and the silences that felt comfortable instead of awkward. Amara would smile at him sometimes, and it felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. Elias would make her laugh occasionally, and it felt like winning a battle he didn't know he was fighting. They didn't talk about it. Didn't name it. Didn't try to define what was happening between them. They just let it exist. One evening, they were sitting on the couch watching a movie on Elias's old television. Some action film from the 90s that neither of them was really paying attention to. Amara had brought Chinese food, and they had eaten too much, and now they were just sitting there, full and content and quiet. Amara's hand was resting on the couch between them. Elias looked at it. At her long fingers and the scar on her thumb from some childhood accident she had mentioned once. He wanted to touch her hand. Wanted to close the distance. But he didn't know if he was allowed. Didn't know if she would welcome it or be uncomfortable. As if reading his mind, Amara reached over and touched his hand. Just lightly. Just for a moment. Elias looked at her. "Is this okay?" she asked. He nodded. He couldn't speak. His throat had closed up with something that felt like hope. She laced her fingers through his, and they sat like that for the rest of the movie, hands intertwined, hearts beating in sync, neither of them saying a word. When the movie ended, Amara stood to leave. "I should go," she said. "Early shift tomorrow." "Okay," Elias said. She looked at him for a long moment, like she was deciding something. Then she leaned down and kissed his forehead. Soft. Gentle. There and gone. "Good night, Elias." "Good night, Amara." She left, and Elias sat on the couch with his hand still warm from her touch and his heart doing something it hadn't done in years. It was beating with something other than fear. But nothing good lasts forever. That's what Elias learned. That's what life had taught him over and over until the lesson was carved into his bones. Amara came to his door one afternoon looking upset. Her eyes were red like she had been crying, and her hands were shaking slightly as she stood in the hallway. "Can I come in?" she asked. "Of course," Elias said, stepping aside immediately. She came in and sat on the couch. Elias sat beside her, concern flooding through him. "What's wrong?" he asked. Amara took a deep breath. "I got reassigned." Elias felt his stomach drop. "What?" "The company is moving me to another building. Across town. They need someone there, and they're pulling me from here. Can't you refuse?" "I can't afford to," Amara said. Her voice was thick with frustration and sadness. "I need this job. I can't risk losing it. The pay is barely enough as it is." Elias felt the world tilt beneath him. She was leaving. Of course she was leaving. Everyone left. Everyone always left. When, he asked. I start there next week. Next week. 7 days. And then she would be gone. I'm so sorry, Amara said. Her voice broke. I tried to argue. I tried to explain that I have clients here who need consistency. But they don't care. They just see numbers and buildings and schedules. It's not your fault, Elias said. But his voice sounded hollow even to himself. I can still visit, Amara said quickly. On my days off. It's just across town. It's not that far. But they both knew it wasn't the same. Across town might as well be across the country when you're working 2 jobs and barely making rent. When every bus ride costs money you don't have. When exhaustion is your constant companion. Yeah, Elias said. Of course. But he didn't believe it. Didn't believe she would keep coming once the obligation was gone. Why would she? He was just some broken veteran she had felt sorry for. Once she wasn't being paid to be here, she would realize there were better ways to spend her time. Amara reached for his hand, but Elias pulled away. I should let you go, he said, standing up. You probably have things to do. Elias. It's fine, he said. Really. Thank you for everything. You've been very kind. He was shutting down. Closing off. Building the walls back up before she could hurt him more by leaving. Amara stood. She looked like she wanted to say something. To argue. To make promises she wouldn't be able to keep. But she didn't. I'll still come by this week, she said quietly. To finish out my regular schedule. Elias nodded without looking at her. She left, and he heard her footsteps fade down the hallway. Heard the elevator ding. Heard the mechanical whir as it carried her away. He stood in the middle of his apartment and felt the walls pressing in. Even the kind ones leave. The voices came back louder than ever. Without Amara, the apartment felt suffocating. The shadows got longer. The silence got heavier. The checking got worse. Elias stopped answering the door when she came by that week. He heard her knock. Heard her call his name. But he didn't answer. What was the point? She was leaving anyway. Better to end it now than drag it out. After the 3rd time he didn't answer, she stopped coming. He told himself that proved he was right. That she had given up. That she was like everyone else. But deep down, he knew he was the one who had given up. He was the one who had pushed her away. He was the one who was too scared of being abandoned to let her stay. The apartment got worse. Dishes piled up again. Trash accumulated. The curtains stayed drawn. The lights stayed on all night because darkness felt like drowning. He stopped taking his medication properly. What was the point? It didn't fix anything. Didn't make him normal. Didn't make him whole. The nightmares got worse. He would wake up screaming, convinced he was back in the compound, back in the sand, back in the moment where everything went wrong and he couldn't save anyone. He started having longer and longer conversations with the voices. They were the only company he had now. They never left. They never got reassigned. They were always there. Even if they were cruel. Even if they told him terrible things. At least they stayed. The neighbors complained more. Building management sent more warnings. He ignored them all. 2 weeks after Amara stopped coming, Elias sat down at his kitchen table and wrote a letter. Not to anyone in particular. Just a letter. It started with an apology. I'm sorry for being broken. I'm sorry for being too much. I'm sorry for not being enough. It went on to explain that he was tired. So tired. That he had been fighting for so long and he didn't have any fight left. That everyone had been right all along. He wasn't the man he used to be. He was just a shell. Just what came back. Just a problem that everyone would be better off without. He set the letter on the table and stared at it. He thought about Peterson. About Rodriguez. About all the people who didn't make it home. Maybe he was supposed to be with them. Maybe he had been living on borrowed time all along. Even the kind ones leave. He closed his eyes. The knock on the door came 3 days later. Elias didn't get up. He was sitting in the recliner, staring at the wall, feeling nothing. The voices were quiet for once. Or maybe he had just stopped listening. The knock came again. Louder this time. Then a voice. Familiar. Impossible. Elias, Open the door. Amara. He must be imagining it. Must be another hallucination. Another trick his broken brain was playing on him. But the knock came again. Elias, I know you're in there. Please open the door. He stumbled to his feet, his body moving before his mind could catch up, and opened the door. Amara was standing there. She wasn't alone. There were two other people with her. A man in a suit, professional looking, with a briefcase. A woman with a clipboard and kind eyes. What is this? Elias asked. His voice was rough from disuse. This is me not walking away, Amara said. She pushed past him into the apartment, gentle but firm. The man and woman followed. Elias stood there, confused, as Amara gestured to the visitors. This is Mr. Garrett from the Veterans Advocacy Office, she said, indicating the man in the suit. And this is Dr. Lin, a social worker who specializes in trauma cases and veteran support services. Elias stared at them, his mind struggling to process what was happening. I don't understand, he said. I did some research, Amara said. Her voice was urgent, determined. You're entitled to benefits, Elias. Real benefits. Housing assistance. Comprehensive therapy. Medication management. Caseworker support. But you're not getting any of it because the system is failing you. I filed, Elias said weakly. They denied me. Because the applications weren't filled out properly, Mr. Garrett said, stepping forward. His voice was professional but warm. Because you didn't have anyone advocating for you. Because the system is designed to be overwhelming so people give up. He set his briefcase down on the coffee table. We're going to fix that, he said. Dr. Lin stepped forward. She was younger than Elias expected, maybe in her 40s, with black hair pulled back and glasses that made her look approachable. Mr. Rowan, she said. I've worked with hundreds of veterans in your situation. What you're experiencing is not your fault. You served your country, and your country has an obligation to serve you back. We're going to make sure that happens. Elias felt something crack in his chest. Something that had been holding everything together suddenly gave way. Why? He whispered. Why are you doing this? Amara stepped in front of him. Because you survived war. You don't have to survive silence too. Her eyes were fierce. Determined. I spent 2 weeks making calls, she said. Researching. Finding people who could help. I wasn't going to just walk away and let you disappear. Elias felt his eyes burn. I thought you left. I didn't leave, Amara said. I was getting help. I stopped answering the door. I know. That's how I knew something was really wrong. Mr. Garrett cleared his throat gently. Mr. Rowan, with your permission, I'd like to sit down and go through your case. Review what benefits you've been denied and why. Start the process of appealing those denials and filing new applications properly. Dr. Lin nodded. And I'd like to connect you with a trauma-informed therapist. Someone who understands military experience and PTSD. Someone who won't just throw pills at you and hope for the best. Elias looked at them. At these strangers who had come into his apartment because Amara had refused to give up. He looked at Amara, standing there with tears in her eyes and steel in her spine. Okay, he whispered. Okay. It didn't fix everything overnight. The process was slow. Frustrating. There were forms and appeals and phone calls and waiting periods that made Elias want to give up a dozen times. But Mr. Garrett was patient. Persistent. He walked Elias through every step. Explained everything in plain language. Made sure nothing slipped through the cracks. Dr. Lin connected him with a therapist named James. A former Marine who had done 2 tours in Afghanistan and understood what it meant to come home different. Who didn't flinch when Elias described the voices or the checking or the nightmares. You're not crazy, James told him in their first session. You're injured. And injuries can heal. Maybe not completely. Maybe not perfectly. But they can get better. It was the first time anyone had said that in a way that felt true. The benefits started coming through. Slowly at first. A housing stipend that meant he could actually afford rent without rationing medication. Then healthcare coverage that actually covered the medication he needed. Then a small increase in his disability payment. It wasn't much. But it was enough to breathe a little easier. Amara came by when she could. It wasn't as often as before. Across town really was far when you were working multiple jobs. But she came. Every week, at least once. Sometimes twice. And she called. Every day. Just to check in. Just to hear his voice. Just to remind him that someone was paying attention. How was therapy? She would ask. Hard, Elias would answer honestly. But good. I think. That's good. How was work? Exhausting. But I'm still standing. That's good. Small conversations. Normal conversations. The kind of thing people who cared about each other did. Elias started sleeping a little better. The nightmares didn't go away, but James taught him techniques to manage them. Grounding exercises. Ways to remind himself where he was. When he was. He started eating more regularly. Amara had shown him how to make simple meals. Nothing fancy, but enough to keep him functioning. He started leaving the apartment occasionally. Short trips at first. Just to the corner store. Then longer ones. To therapy appointments. To the VA office. To the park near his building. The voices were still there. But they were quieter now. More manageable. James explained that they might never go away completely, but that didn't mean they had to control his life. The checking was still there too. But it was less compulsive now. He could walk away from the door after touching it 3 times instead of 17. Progress wasn't perfection. It was just less. The neighbors still whispered. But Elias didn't care anymore. Their opinions had never mattered. He had just let himself believe they did because he had nothing else to measure himself against. Now he had people who saw him. Really saw him. And that mattered more than 100 whispers. 6 months after Amara brought Mr. Garrett and Dr. Lin to his apartment, Elias stood in his living room and looked around. The apartment was cleaner than it had been in years. Not perfect. Not magazine-worthy. But livable. Manageable. The blinds were open. Sunlight streamed through the windows. The curtains Amara had helped him pick out were drawn back, letting in the world. The pills were organized in a weekly container on the kitchen counter. He took them regularly now. The right doses at the right times. The letters from the VA were in a folder on the desk. Filed properly. Responded to promptly with Mr. Garrett's help. The boots were in the closet. He had cleaned them himself last week. It had taken him 3 hours and several breaks, but he had done it. He wasn't fixed. He would never be fixed. That's what James kept reminding him. The goal wasn't to go back to who he was before. That person was gone. The goal was to figure out who he could be now. And he was starting to figure that out. He was someone who survived. Someone who struggled. Someone who needed help. Someone who was learning to accept that help instead of pushing it away. Someone who was worth fighting for. There was a knock at the door. Elias walked over and opened it without checking the peephole 17 times. Just once. Then he opened it. Amara stood in the hallway, smiling. Hey, she said. Hey, Elias said. She came in, and he closed the door behind her. They sat on the couch like they always did. She had brought tea from the corner store. The same cheap brand they always drink. They had tried fancier stuff once, but they both agreed the cheap stuff tasted better. Or maybe it just tasted familiar. How was your week? Amara asked. Good, Elias said. And he meant it. I walked to the park 3 times. Saw James twice. Got approved for an increase in my housing stipend. That's wonderful, Amara said. Her smile was genuine. Proud. How was yours? Exhausting as always. But I got assigned back to this building part-time starting next month. Elias looked at her surprised. Really? Really? I've been requesting the transfer for months. Finally went through. That's great. I thought so. They drank their tea in comfortable silence. After a while, Amara set down her cup and looked at him. I'm proud of you, she said quietly. Elias felt his throat tighten. I'm just doing what I'm supposed to do. You're doing more than that, Amara said. You're fighting. Every single day. That takes courage. You're the one who's courageous, Elias said. You're the one who came back. Who brought help. Who didn't give up. We're both courageous, Amara said. You for fighting. Me for staying. That's how this works. Elias reached for her hand, and she took it without hesitation. They sat like that for a long time, hands intertwined, comfortable in the silence. Can I ask you something? Elias said eventually. Of course. What are we doing? He gestured between them. Is this friendship? Is this something else? Amara smiled. Does it need a label? Maybe not. But I'd like to know. She thought about it for a moment. I care about you. A lot. More than I probably should given how we met. You make me laugh. You make me think. You remind me that kindness matters. She paused. I don't know if there's a word for that, she continued. But whatever it is, I want to keep doing it. Elias smiled. Really smiled. The kind of smile that reached his eyes. Me too, he said. Amara leaned over and kissed him. Not on the forehead this time. On the lips. Soft and sweet and full of promise. When she pulled back, she was smiling. There, she said. Now we definitely don't need a label. Elias laughed. It felt strange. Foreign. Like a muscle he hadn't used in so long he forgot how it worked. But it felt good. They spent the rest of the afternoon together. Watching bad television. Talking about nothing important. Just existing in the same space. When Amara left that evening, Elias stood at the door and watched her walk down the hallway. See you next week, she called. See you next week, he replied. She disappeared around the corner and Elias closed the door. He didn't check it 17 times. Just once. Then he went to the kitchen and made himself dinner. Nothing fancy. Just pasta and vegetables. But he ate it at the table instead of in front of the television. Small victories. That's what James called them. Small victories that added up over time. Elias was starting to believe him. The world calls them broken veterans. But sometimes, they're just heroes waiting for someone to stop walking away. Sometimes, all it takes is one person who sees past the scars. One person who sits in the silence. One person who refuses to give up even when giving up would be easier. Elias had been to war. He had survived things most people couldn't imagine. He had come home different. Changed. Wounded in ways that didn't show up on x-rays. But the hardest battle he ever fought was learning that he was still worth fighting for. And Amara reminded him of that every single day. Not because she fixed him. You can't fix a person. People aren't broken machines waiting for the right tools. But because she saw him. The real him. The struggling, surviving, still breathing him who woke up every morning and chose to keep going even when everything in him wanted to stop. She saw him. And she stayed. And that made all the difference. Not every story ends with a cure. Not every struggle ends with triumph. Not every wound heals completely. But sometimes, healing looks like learning to live with the scars. Learning that you don't have to be perfect to be worthy. Learning that asking for help isn't weakness. Learning that the people who matter will stay even when staying is hard. Elias learned that. And he was still learning it, every single day. The voices were still there. The nightmares still came. The checking still happened. But he was managing. He was surviving. He was living. And he wasn't alone. That was enough. That would always be enough. Sometimes the greatest act of courage isn't charging into battle. It's opening the door.